The Obama administration is openly escalating its campaign against private gun ownership and shaking up the top ranks of the military command structure. But is it also preparing to make war on the American population? According to a person identified as a former senior military official, the answer to that shocking question is yes. World-renowned educator and human rights activist Jim Garrow says that the source is a man regarded as one of America's foremost military heroes. He told him that President Obama is using a new litmus test for determining who will stay and who must go among top-ranked military leaders. That test is whether they will fire on U.S. citizens or not.
There's a shocking claim that Obama only wants military leaders who will fire on U.S. citizens. This comes from a very credited source. This man made a Facebook post yesterday, Dr. Jim Garrow, that he had been informed by a senior military leader that Obama has a new litmus test. And that litmus test is, will you fire on U.S. citizens or not? I have many buddies in the reserves, navies, marines. Many of them have told me the same thing. Matter of fact, quite a few of them have told me it was one of the very first questions they were even asked, if they would fire on U.S. citizens if they had to, which is disturbing in its own right.
Urban military training exercises are becoming an increasingly common sight in many U.S. cities. The Department of Homeland Security has spent the past year acquiring more than 1 billion rounds of high-performance ammunition. Do these developments suggest concerns over a potential terrorist attack? Are they preparations for widespread social upheaval? Is there perhaps something even more sinister underway? Military veteran and independent journalist David Bard reports that he spoke with a man identified as an insider at the Department of Homeland Security who described urban warfare training as, quote, desensitizing exercises all across the U.S., adding that, quote, we're being prepared for mass civil unrest in major U.S. cities. DoD will be expected to help when we're requested.
My name is Robert Whitaker. I'm the tactical supervisor for El Paso SRT for Homeland Security Investigations. Well, we have our big vehicle out here. It's an armored vehicle. It's an MRAP vehicle. It's mine resistant, ambush protected. That's what it stands for. And this is what we use to deliver our team to high-risk warrant services.
Who's identified as a troublemaker, he has a cursor. He can put that cursor on that individual, pull the trigger that's on the joystick, and the energy is sent downrange at the speed of light.
The electromagnetic radiation released by the active denial system is similar to the microwaves in your microwave oven, in that it causes the water molecules in the target to become excited and heat up.
DHS supplier provides shooting targets of American gun owners. Paul Joseph Watson has this shocking story about how Law Enforcement Targets Incorporated is producing cardboard cutouts of, quote, non-traditional threats. Of course, this is on the heels of the federal government purchasing in excess of 2 billion bullets for non-law enforcement, non-lethal agencies. What the hell is going on? They're producing targets that say do not hesitate, of children, of pregnant women, of elderly men, in summary, of society's most vulnerable and typically most innocent citizens. You just cannot believe these cutouts, but they produce them, and you've really got to ask why, on the heels of Homeland Security and other agencies preparing to deal with the American people, openly stating they consider them to be potential extremists and the enemies in the event of an economic or civil unrest event, anything really they can use to justify a total literal occupation of America through Homeland Security and related agencies. Now let's roll some of those incredible cardboard cutouts, again, that they say are going to be used by law enforcement who need to get over their hesitation factor for enemies they may encounter, quote, for the first time. And the obvious question is, why is there such a demand for these items, which again show nothing other than old ladies? There's a child with a gun, maybe 6 or 7 years old. There's a pregnant woman photographed in a nursery who's the target. Now, why is the officer there with the drawn gun in the nursery in the first place? Does he have a warrant? Has there been due process? Why does he consider this pregnant woman to be the enemy? Why are they planning to take down vulnerable and ordinary Americans? This is really bizarre, and it really should strike a nerve.
Our next guest says there is no such thing as gun control, only people control. You just saw him giving a passionate speech at a rally in Maryland. Joining us now is former Secret Service agent Dan Bongino. Dan, thanks a lot for joining us. What do you mean there's no such thing as gun control, only people control? Tell me what that means.
Tucker, this is larger ideological ploy by this administration. They're not being authentic with America, whether it's the sequester, health care, or the gun control issue. What they do is they manipulate an emotional crisis, a national emotional crisis, to further an ideological agenda which involves the evaporation, the slow disintegration of your civil rights, your liberties, your ability to live and let live. And it's a disturbing pattern that, frankly, is really starting to get under my skin.
I once read where you said that when you were in the business of protecting public figures, when you went to a place with gun control, you didn't feel safer.
Right. I mean, we have this Downtown Abbey class of politicians and bureaucrats who they understand as clear as day that gun control has absolute, which, by the way, is a myth, that they're manipulating the language, gun control, with air quotes, has no effect whatsoever on violence or the ability of wolves in our society to impart violence on you.
A two-tier system where privileged people, Mayor Bloomberg, for example, are surrounded by bodyguards with high-capacity magazines, and the rest of us have to make do with double-barrel shotguns. Is that adequate, do you think? I mean, is the average person safe with no firearm at home?
No, you're not. You know, Tucker, law-breaking folks, outlaws, are outlaws and lawbreakers for a reason. They don't care about the law. The law means nothing to them. In my 17 years in law enforcement, I never, ever arrested anyone or knew anyone who did on a gun crime who had the gun legally. So you have to ask yourself, what's the purpose of this legislation? To disarm law-abiding American citizens, men, women, who just want to defend themselves and act within the scope of the law? You know, that Constitution means something, or it should. And apparently it doesn't to this administration.
Now, there's a move apparently afoot to disarm returning veterans. Tell me what you know about that.
Yeah, I read this story. You know, this is absolutely incredible. You know, I have a friend, my friend Mark, who a wounded warrior, was literally severed in half. He had a grenade belt on and stepped on an IED. And he likes to hunt. And I thought to myself, so this man gave life and limb to protect our civil liberties, and then he comes home and with no judicial review whatsoever, a VA official, a bureaucrat, gets to determine if he's allowed to have his own civil rights back, his own right to self-protection. Does that not bother anybody? And it's unfortunately epidemic, though, in this administration and this new political aristocracy that we live in.
Here, I just want to read a quote from the letter to vets from the executive branch. Quote, a determination of incompetency will prohibit you from purchasing, possessing, receiving, or transporting a firearm or ammunition. If you knowingly violate any of these prohibitions, you'll be fined, imprisoned, or both pursuant to the Brady Handgun Violence Prevention Act. That is a very threatening letter.
Well, Tucker, I know you're familiar with the work of Thomas Sowell. You know, he calls us the vision of the anointed. Here again, here's this bureaucrat, this letter you get from a class of bureaucrats, basically saying what you can and can't do while they do the exact opposite. I mean, we are living in this post-constitutional society right now where somehow they have sold to you, the American citizen, that it's moral, ethical, kind or generous to disarm you while allowing others, our veterans as well, while allowing the wolves in our society, the criminals, to impart violence upon you at will. And they know that you won't be carrying a weapon in these strict gun control states, one of which I live in Maryland.
That is about the most eloquent defense of the right of self-protection I've heard in a long time. Dan, thanks a lot for coming on. I appreciate it.
Thank you, sir.
Since President Barack Obama has taken office in 2008, there have been over 65 million gun purchases. That's 91% more than George W. Bush's first-term total. According to data compiled by the FBI, the number of Americans purchasing guns has skyrocketed since Obama was elected. In 2009, there were 13.9 million background checks for Americans buying firearms. For 2010, background checks totaled 14.3 million. In 2011, 16.3 million, and in 2012, 19.4 million. This totals 65 million background checks completed since President Barack Obama's first 4 years in office, or approximately 44,000 background checks per day. By comparison, the number of background checks in Obama's first term is 91.1% higher than President George W. Bush's first term total of about 34.2 million background checks. So post Sandy Hook in Aurora, Colorado, do you think Americans feel safer based on the numbers in total background checks in order to purchase firearms in the United States of America? Or are Americans worried that their right to self-defense, ability to bear arms and form well-regulated militias in this country, is about to be altered for good?